Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come.
Good evening and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney.
And I'm Craig Freeman. The originally scheduled topic for tonight was to be the high rate of Louisianans without health insurance. But forces of nature have turned our attention to an equally critical issue, that of the recovery and aftermath from Hurricanes Gustav and Ike.
Well, certainly everyone's thinking about hurricanes, Craig. I know we all are. Arriving just 3 days after the third anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Gustav made its mark. Not with rising waters, but with crushing winds, downed trees, and power lines, left two-thirds of Louisiana without electricity. How prepared was the state for its third major hurricane in 3 years? As Hurricanes Gustav and Ike traveled through Louisiana, their strong winds produced the largest power outage in the state's history. Their paths through the central, southwestern, and northwestern regions of the state created disruptions of service for 1.5 million consumers. Utility companies estimated that some customers could be without power for over a month.
They said it should be restored by 11:15 p.m. on 9/24. That's a long time from now.
Stuart Barron lives in the old Goodwood neighborhood of Baton Rouge. Barron was one of the 91% of East Baton Rouge Parish customers that experienced power outages from Gustav.
We don't see any action here, and we don't see any evidence of Entergy or anybody trying to do anything.
We've gotten customers restored faster in Gustav than we did in Katrina.
Jeff Holeman is Entergy's regional customer service manager. Entergy's outages due to Gustav alone were close to 800,000. Second only to the nearly 1 million customers Hurricane Katrina knocked offline. The large losses this time, Holeman says, were due to the type of damage Gustav's winds inflicted.
The path that this storm took basically took out our transmission system. You know, a lot of times a storm will come through, it won't take out the transmission system, it'll drop trees on lines and you put the poles, and the poles fall and you put them back up. In this case, we had serious transmission issues. We had serious damage to the high voltage lines that come in and serve the communities.
The issue of how to better protect transmission lines came up at the Public Service Commission's meetings held 1 week after Gustav. Entergy's Vice President of Transmission, Randy Helmick, was questioned about the feasibility of burying the lines.
Is there any way possible, or have y'all looked at, I'm sure you have, but is there any way that you could make some of these storm-proof by burying half of them?
It is technically possible, but really not economically viable, that you're talking of tens of billions of dollars in investment to offset the potential events that may happen every 2 or 3 years.
The Public Service Commission plans to launch a formal inquiry into the pre- and post-storm performance of several power companies, including Entergy, Cleco, Demco, and Point Capay Electric. A less debatable issue has been the response of local and state government to Hurricanes Gustav and Ike. Lessons learned from 2005 prompted quicker and more decisive action. Governor Jindal declared a state of emergency for Louisiana 7 days before Gustav made landfall, 4 days sooner than former Governor Blanc had for Hurricane Katrina. And he initiated an historic evacuation of the state's entire coastal population in a dual contraflow more than 24 hours before Gustav's arrival.
We were able to evacuate 1.9 million people, which what I'm being told is a record for the United States to be able to evacuate that number of people within such a short amount of time.
Mark Cooper is the director of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. Cooper feels that the biggest changes in the state's response since Katrina were the prepositioning of resources, such as buses and shelters, and a unified command group that had built relationships with local, state, and federal partners over the last 6 months.
We didn't look at this from a strictly emergency management standpoint. Some of these issues were managed from a business perspective, and we were able to do that because of the fact that we had relationships with each other. We had people that weren't necessarily trained in emergency management that were able to look at issues from a different perspective and come up with solutions.
When supplies promised by FEMA were not delivered on time, National Guard troops were dispatched to Texas to pick up more tarps. The state also worked with church groups and others to supplement food needs. And to get around FEMA red tape, the governor authorized $20 million to purchase 400 generators to provide emergency power to gas stations, grocery stores, and pharmacies. But the state's response was not without missteps. Louisiana's Social Services Chief, Ann Williamson, submitted her resignation on the 15th after complaints from Governor Jindal over her department's handling of the Disaster Food Stamp Assistance Program and state-run shelters in North Louisiana. And while 99% of the federal levees held after Hurricanes Gustav and Ike, storm surge produced levee breaches or overtopping in 5 parishes, as well as the New Orleans area.
I think this serves as a very serious reminder of the challenges of locating in the New Orleans area.
Dr. Jim Richardson, an economist with LSU, feels that both hurricanes draw attention again to the vulnerability of New Orleans as a place of investment.
Helma and Lafourche and Terrebonne parishes, those are industries that are really there because they have to be there. Whereas a lot of the industries in New Orleans do not necessarily have to be there.
Early estimates of the economic impact to the state are between $2 to $5 billion in lost business activity from Gustav and between $6 to $18 billion in property damage from both storms. Insurance payouts could hit over $3 billion just from Gustav. Insurance Commissioner Jim Donelon says his office has been getting many calls from homeowners, surprised to discover that their hurricane deductible is a percentage of their home's insured value rather than a flat rate.
When you have a claim from a named storm, Gustav, your deductible is not the all perils deductible otherwise applicable in your policy, $500, $1,000, $2,500, but rather your deductible is that percent, 2, 3, 5 of your total insured value.
The percentages range from 2% for State Farm Insurance to 3% for Farmers Insurance Group and 5% for Allstate. Louisiana is among 18 states that allows the hurricane or named storm deductibles in its policies. As debris removal continues across the state from hurricanes Gustav and Ike, Louisianians anxiously look forward to the end of hurricane season on November 30th.
Several of those anxious residents are with us here tonight in our studio audience. They include participants who are randomly recruited and surveyed for us by LSU's Office of Public Policy Research. Of those responding, 71% identified themselves as Democrats, 7% as Republicans, and 14% as independent. For individuals and groups involved in the preparation and response to Gustav, 57% of our audience gave an excellent rating to local, city, and parish officials. 50% gave the same rating to Governor Jindal. 28% rated FEMA's preparation and response as excellent, but the same percentage of respondents rated FEMA as poor. And responding in a city experiencing some of the largest number of outages, an equal percentage of those surveyed, 36%, gave energy companies either excellent or good marks. So let's start there. How long were you without power, and how do you feel about the energy companies' response? Do you think that energy companies did the right thing during the storm? Are you happy or satisfied with what energy companies did? Millie?
I think it was overwhelming what they faced, as it was for all of us. And based on what I've seen, I think they did a pretty good job. We were without electricity for about 6 days. Fortunately, we went to my daughter's, who had a generator, so that helped.
And so it's expected. We kind of know in Louisiana that we're going to face these things, and it wasn't too bad, Cheryl.
Oh, yeah, I think we were out without electricity for about 2 days, and I think they did a great job.
2 days? That's not a bad job.
Yeah.
I was out for 3 hours. So.
For 3 hours?
Okay, well, I was out for 12 days.
Okay.
But I will tell you this, and that was, we heard people complaining about, well, they should do the residences first. And I think they made absolutely the right call to deal with the hospitals and the businesses so that we could, the people in the hospitals could be taken care of, so the injured could be taken care of, and so that the retail stores could be open so that people could go ahead and get on with their lives.
Exactly.
And so they did the right thing. Even, what about, I know that there was some concern about traffic lights, and when are we going to get power back to traffic lights, and how are people going to get around in the city? Was that a concern for you at all?
Very much so.
For me, there's a lot of traffic on Jefferson Highway and other busy places, and you had to wait for a long time to get across one. It's very dangerous too.
Could the energy companies do anything different?
I have to say that some of the intersections worked a lot better without the traffic lights.
They really did.
So
once people realized what a four-way stop was, or for young people who learned very vocally from people who instructed them, older folks who instructed them what a four-way stop was and what the protocol was in terms of thoughtfulness. So it did make some passageways very usable.
So it wasn't bad. I mean, a couple of weeks was a huge storm, and you're satisfied with the way things worked out. What about the government's response? How do you think the government, either state or local governments, reacted or handled the situation?
I thought the state did extremely well. Governor Jindal was very prepared. He was very demanding to a point that I personally disagreed with his assessment that Entergy's time frames were inappropriate given the magnitude of the trees and the outages that they had to endure.
So, I agree with that.
Sure.
I think Entergy did a wonderful job.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it hurt, though, for Governor Jindal to come out and say, let's get with it, and I think that he knew that it was a hard call. But I think that he, as a leader, he stood up and he made that hard call. But then also, I think he had some compassion for the system.
I was without power for 10 days. And I do feel that the governor made a good call. He was excellent in what he did, holding everyone accountable. And as far as the energy situation, I think Entergy did an excellent job. They did as well as they could do under the circumstances. I did not expect to get my power that quickly, and I did, so I was very satisfied.
I think it gives us an opportunity, too, to look. Entergy is not the only utility provider in the state. So it gives us an opportunity to look at parishes and cities that have their own systems and some of the electric co-ops. What worked, what didn't work. In a certain sense, we're an experiment in the raw, looking at what works in these kinds of situations. And I think we've learned so much since Katrina and Rita and the storms of 2005 would be my impression of it. And so what do we gain from this one? How do we get better for, God help us, the next ones? But we know they'll come.
And you remind readers, because my question is, what do we need to do to make it better next time? We know that we'll have more hurricanes. Do we need to bury lines? Are you willing to pay more money to have lines buried? Do you think it helps?
I don't think buried lines necessarily translate into more reliable power, especially in Louisiana, considering Louisiana soils and the shifting soils. The access to the power lines underground would be very difficult. It's a mess with all the trees and everything, but when you have to dig up the power lines, you get into a different kind of mess.
Exactly.
And so don't bury, just keep doing what you're doing in energy companies, and we'll deal with some power outages.
3 years, the last hurricane was, 3 years ago?
Right.
And my light bill $500 now, and if they buried it,
so you're not willing to pay any more money for buried lines?
No.
I don't think we should say don't bury the lines. I think they should do some sort of studies to see what would be more feasible economically, because if you've got the buried lines, it's going to cost us more. Of course, on the other hand, if you get hurricanes every other year, it's still costing a lot, so the feasibility studies need to be done to see which is more economical.
But you want to see the numbers. You want to see the data
numbers,
to figure out what to do.
And perhaps with new subdivisions as they're being built, perhaps as on a going forward basis. But I think we'd be well advised to look at perhaps doing some hardening of the power infrastructure when it goes to the hospitals and gas stations and retail locations at a minimum.
Okay. And so we need to protect hospitals, and we need to protect gas stations.
And the sewage treatment plant.
But do you care? I live in a neighborhood with a lot of trees. Is that just the cost of living in a well-shaded neighborhood?
Either that, or even to look at really encouraging us that have big trees in our yards to take care of them. It becomes preventive maintenance of making sure I mean, water oaks only live a certain amount of time. Should it be a kind of thing that you've got to take them down after 20 years, and making sure that where the lines run, that it's up to the homeowner to make sure that those branches over those lines are trimmed regularly, so that at least you're dealing with the transmission from a major line to your house. What could be done there? I think they're little things that might all add up.
And possibly Entergy could trim some of the trees around their power lines a little bit more than they're doing now. And I think maybe that could be looked into also.
What about, when freezers go and, we get, I guess, some relief for the food that was in our expired freezers or MREs? Do you think that the government should help us when the power goes out and we have problems, or should we protect ourselves better by cutting trees down and being good stewards? Do you think?
Yes, I think that we have some responsibility, because we know where we live and what happens. We should be prepared, at least a mindset for preparedness.
Shirley, you're nodding your head. You agree?
Yes,
Okay.
I agree. Yeah, the government should help some, but it's also our responsibility to be prepared.
And how much is some, Frank?
Well, some people disabled or stuff like this just doesn't have the ability to do things should be helped. But most people should be able to do for their own.
We had 300,000 people with food stamps. Is that too many, or is that?
That's too many, but that's the way it is.
If people can't afford to take down the trees in their yard or trim the branches, though, is it still their responsibility, or should Entergy or the government take over?
And do that. Yes, exactly.
What do you think? I mean, should the power companies themselves maintain these lines in a different way, or is it my responsibility to go out with a ladder and cut trees in the backyard?
Around a live power line?
If it's on the power line, then I think it's the the light company problem.
Okay.
I mean, because eventually it's gonna hurt. I mean, they're gonna have to come out and do something anyway. Either put it back up, or
Good maintenance is wonderful. I mean, it pays.
But now I also hear people complain when they cut trees too much. They say, "Oh, you cut this beautiful tree and now it looks bad." I mean, do you blame Entergy for that, or after Gustav and Ike, you say, "Cut as much as you need"?
Complain.
Okay. Well, what about FEMA's response? I mean, FEMA, there was some issue with the tarps and the things didn't get here in a timely fashion, at least according to some people. And I know the governor was upset at a point. What do you think about FEMA's response to the hurricanes, or was it the state of Louisiana, or did the federal government help the way it should?
Well, I heard that the tarp from FEMA, 2 of them were not very good quality. Now, that's what I heard. I had no personal experience, but I have heard that from one of my neighbors.
I had a great experience. I mean, I don't know who gave me the stuff, though. I went down to Sigan and got tarps and went up and put them up and got MREs, and I don't know who provided those. They were National Guardsmen, but they may have come from FEMA. I think it was great.
So the government's response, and it could be FEMA, it could be the state, it could be the parish, but they were good. They helped you the way you expected them to help.
Yeah, more than I expected, because I didn't expect that.
Okay.
And I think if you look to comparing from the last storm to this one, and I was involved in after Katrina and Rita, and you recognize the hundreds of meetings that took place, that we hear a lot of negative things, but I'll say that we also should be very proud as a state on the collaboration and cooperation that's gotten developed between government agencies, among the multiple agencies, government agencies, state agencies, nonprofit organizations, faith-based organization, individual families being prepared, where folks in New Orleans now know that the porch was closed in on their relatives in Baton Rouge and in Baker, because that's where they evacuate to now. So I think collectively we really are a study in making improvements. The 211 system was phenomenal in the way that it worked. Let's also give ourselves credit.
Just how much, at least in our state. When did we first, I guess it was after Hurricane George, and we started contraflow, and every time it's gotten so much better, and the travel times are so much better. My only issue there is maybe working a little bit more with our sister states so our folks can actually go to the restroom. But other than that, because eventually they're going to need us, and so it would be nice for us to all. But I know that's again, as you say, it's a study and improvement, and I have full confidence that we're going to take the lessons that we learned from this storm and apply them and improve it even further.
Now, if you were advising somebody who was moving to the state, would you say, come on in? I mean, are people nervous about Louisiana after 3 or 4 major hurricanes in the last 4 years? Do you think?
No. Every state has something. So you just pick what you can live with. I don't want to go down in the cellar for a tornado or a cyclone or whatever.
We don't have snowstorms either.
That's right.
So it's better than snow. It's better than hurricane. I mean, better than earthquakes.
We weren't without power in a blizzard. Okay. So I mean,
that's right.
Did anybody have any problems? I mean, it sounds like we have a great experience through these storms. Was there any complaint at all?
Brought the kids together. I mean, brought families together. You know, they got a chance to talk.
Okay. You met neighbors. You got.
I would say one of the biggest things that we're hearing is because of this new thing with the insurance of the named storm deductibles, and it's having the biggest burden on folks with fixed incomes and the elderly, and particularly we were very successful in evacuating people, but much of that came out of people's own pockets to evacuate. So that, I think, is something we're going to have to deal with, is how do we assist in the situations where people used up the savings that they had for this particular storm, and how many people will it add and put in a poverty situation that weren't in that situation just before.
And I think you've led us to a great stopping point, Susan. You've got a great question for our panel of experts. And so when we return, we'll be joined by our panel of experts to further discuss the aftermath of Hurricanes Gustav and Ike. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. We're discussing the aftermath and recovery of Louisiana to Hurricanes Gustav and Ike. Joining us now is our panel of experts. Pat Santos is the Assistant Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. Mr. Santos has the primary oversight of all of the state's emergency management functions. Renae Conley is the President and CEO of Entergy Louisiana and Entergy Gulf States Louisiana, a position she has held since 2000. Combined, the two utilities serve 1 million customers in the state. Lawrence St. Blanc has been the Executive Secretary of the Louisiana Public Service Commission since 1995. In addition to advising the Commission, he also serves as a liaison between public utility carriers and the Commissioners. Dr. James Richardson is a professor of economics in the Orso School of Business Administration and director of the Public Administration Institute at Louisiana State University. Let's go to our participants for their questions. And Susan, you ended the last part with an interesting question about insurance. What are your concerns about the way insurance has changed in light of some of these recent hurricanes?
It's the effect it's going to have on our whole population, and though we know it's having significant effects on the elderly and those on fixed incomes, in the way in which we have such extended families in our state. We know that they're grandparents raising grandchildren. In what way is it going to further affect poverty rates in our state, and how do we plan for that?
Jim, I think you may be the best person to...
I guess I may be the best person, but it's not a simple answer, unfortunately.
Right. Of course not.
If you're going to have insurance, we have to pay the fees that will make it ability for the insurance companies to be here, and we don't know what those are. Of course, they've changed them over since Katrina. They've upped deductibles and certain things. They've changed the rates and things of that nature. And I think that's one of those ongoing crises. But I think, as a practical matter, you can do public things like perhaps make the buildings more secure, but that costs money too. And that'll help insurance rates over time. You can do things like that, but in the end, the insurance rates are going to be there, and they're going to be higher than they have been in the past, and that's just going to be something we, as a people, have to somehow come to grips with.
And I'm wondering, just as I'm sitting here, Jim, that if what we've done with health insurance, with having health savings account and getting a deduction on our taxes if we choose a high deductible rate, and it makes us be put in saving. I don't know, would that work now even for property if you chose to have, or you knew you had a hurricane deductible? Anyway.
Well, it possibly could, but again, then you're interfering, you're bringing in some type of public assistance through the back door through a tax program. And again, that's something which people may say we have to encourage people to buy insurance, and that's one way to maybe encourage them to buy insurance. But again, it's reducing the cost through a public program to a tax break. And that's something we'll have to work through the U.S. Congress then. It's not something we can solve here in Louisiana.
Okay, well, what about the elderly that's on a fixed income and can't, afford to have those, those extras done?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very special case. We'll have to deal with a special case, how we deal with certain groups of people who simply, for whatever reason, cannot possibly make that insurance program work for them. And perhaps we have to have a special program of some sort. But then it has to be aimed, I think, to keep it not so costly to the public sector. So it has to be aimed at a very special group of people who may have very difficulties that simply cannot be met by themselves. There's no way they can handle it personally.
And we also talked a little bit earlier about, at least some of the lessons that we learned from the hurricanes. Do you guys have any other questions really about the way that we can do things in the future? It sounds like you're pretty happy about the way that the state responded to some of the things, Rachel.
Well, yeah, I had a question about implementing the business model in lieu of a disaster management model in this case when Gustav hit. I think it was Mark Cooper who made that comment, and I was just wondering if you could describe, Pat, how that worked, how you went about implementing a business model, and also how and why it worked better than a disaster management model.
Well, we've been working on this for quite some time. The lessons learned from Katrina and Rita, the fixes to those problems that we had back then have been in the works for quite some time. We still use the National Incident Model. We still use ICS. The big difference, I think, this time was the relationships that we had formed at every level of government, at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. We've been working with these different levels for 3 years. We've been in plans for evacuation, and the fruits of those efforts, the coordination, the relationships, paid off for us in a total evacuation of South Louisiana. Never has been done before. You've heard people talk about that. You've seen it written in the papers. The other thing is that the leadership from Governor Jindal, the secretaries that make up the unified command, when there was something that was going wrong, and invariably something will go wrong. Nothing's going to run perfect. When you're talking about plans of such magnitude, he directed that we form task forces that directly go and solve that problem. And let's get on it. No excuses. Let's find solutions. And that's what this was all about. And that's why I think you saw the success that we had as a state at the local level, state level, and working with our federal partners.
It does sound to me that that's more of a disaster management model, though, than a business model. And so you still think that the disaster management model was generally followed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But it's based on results. If there was something that was not going right, the right people were put on it to fix it immediately.
And do you think that's more of a business model?
No, I think it's more of following what we've been taught, what we've been teaching our first responders, what we've been teaching our government officials, all up and down, again, every level of government, is the National Incident Model System, National Response Plan, working together, coordination, common language, goals and objectives. And so there is a mix of that. There's some military thrown in there, there's some business applications thrown in there. It's all about getting it done. And I think that everybody would agree that at every level, I think we were successful.
Can I monopolize just once more? Along that incident command system, I was actually interested in how Entergy enacts incident command system when a hurricane strikes. I know that Con Ed has an incident command structure that they enact, and I was just wondering how Entergy goes about enacting an instrument?
Yeah, very much almost like a military operation. We actually have what we call a storm boss, and we have a command center that we bring people together. Probably we start watching it maybe 10 days before it even gets into an area that we would be concerned about, and we start planning for the worst and hoping for the best is what we say. And we have a mutual assistant aid with other utilities, and so we start talking to them about what people they would have available, what crews that they have available. We start getting logistics lined up. People get on the phones to start reserving hotel rooms, and we start planning for if it hits in this particular area, where would we bring our crews, where would we bring our facilities. We have plans for taking out of harm's way our vehicles, but then we can have them easily ready to move back into harm's way. This has been a very interesting is probably not the right term to use, but we have very structured drills every year that we go through in preparation of a storm. And Katrina, we learned a lot from that. We actually had drilled that event in May of '05. What would we do if we had a direct hit to the coastline into New Orleans and we had 20 feet of water? And so we learned a lot from that drill as to people we had perhaps in harm's way, different ways that we need to coordinate across the system, and we learned a lot and put that in place before Katrina hit. And we're more prepared for that storm. Interestingly enough, this year, in May of this year, we drilled for a storm that would hit directly the path that Gustav did, and that our transmission lines would be taken down that connect Baton Rouge to New Orleans, and that we would need to figure out how do we island New Orleans and be able to manage the generation with the transmission and bring that down together so that we were able to maintain the integrity of the structure and not have everyone lose power. And we did that. It was the first time ever that anyone has accomplished a feat of that. We're very proud of what our people accomplished. At the same time this year, we drilled that we would have another storm hit a week after a direct hit. I mean, it's so. So from that
next year, can you simply let us know what
our plans are?
People know what to plan for.
But as a result of that, we had a lot of things in place in terms of how do you get people prepared and lined up and resources available. And a lot of this is having a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to maneuver quickly to where does the direct hit actually occur, and being able to respond to that. And I can't say enough of the people that come to our aid. We had almost 15,000 people here on the ground within a matter of 24 to 48 hours here to help us. And I know it's difficult at times for people to be without electricity, which we take very personally to make sure we get it back up as quickly as possible. But it's a dangerous job, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm very proud to say that we were able to get basically everybody back up without any serious incidents on this storm. So it's been one we'll learn from. I mean, there'll be things that we go back every time we relook and think, what can we do better?
And from the PSC standpoint, I mean, is there anything that you're looking at to figure out what you can do better next time?
Yes, basically everything Ms. Renae just told you, they file with us, and we have that, and every year we bring them in. They go through their system recoveries with us, plus their load shedding, because when these systems go down, you got to shed the load, you got to bring the load back up. So they have all that on file with us, and then we coordinate with them. They have their drills. We know what they come out on their drills. We do this for every utility in the state. They have to keep that on file. As soon as it becomes a tropical storm, we start talking back and forth, and then, of course, we start watching the dollars, of course. But the main thing is that we start the coordination between moving the trucks in, how we go on them. Then we help at the state level with Pat and the rest of the government to get the utilities in place. As the storm changes its direction, we move trucks and so on down the line. So all of this is filed with us with the Public Service Commission, and we take a look at it. Then after the storm, and after we get everybody's lights back on, then we sit down and we go back through this program again. We track them by the hour at the OAC. We know exactly how many lights out, who's out, where, and then we start making sure that we get the hospitals on, get the nursing homes on, getting the fire, the police, and so on, and we just coordinate between all the utilities. Entergy has transmission for all the small co-ops. So without their transmission, the co-ops can't light up. So lots of times you're saying, I don't see anybody in my neighborhood. Well, the neighborhood is that till we get the transmission over here, the little neighborhoods won't light up. So that's the coordination that goes between all of the utility companies as we begin to try to put the whole system back together. It is a system. This system is actually, we have a systems agreement that goes between Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas that we have to coordinate all this. So as you do, one of the great things that happened is that when we had to get New Orleans and Jefferson and that area as an island, that means there was no transmission at all going in. So you only had enough generation to keep what was in there. And it was a big task, and it was a lot of calculations going on by a lot of smart engineers, and they said, we can do this, and it worked.
There's a lot of cheering when that
when that thing went on, everybody just
and no one else noticed it.
Nobody else noticed it, but immediately we were able to bring in lights now, more lights into the New Orleans area, and we lit up the river. And there we got the refineries back up. We got those back up to get gasoline in and start those things going again. But without this one patch, it could have been a different story, and a lot of people don't know that story. But these are the type of things that go on 24 hours. Pat knows we're there all day and all night trying to make sure that these things can come through. And I can't, we just can't thank the people who out there in those bucket trucks. They were still 30-mile-an-hour winds, lightning storms, if I remember the day after. They were in those bucket trucks doing that. That's the real heroes in this thing, is those guys, men and women, were out there putting those lines back together.
Given your comments about the preparation and the PSC's involvement in it, what about the audit that I have heard that you're going to an outside contractor? What's going to be the intent, and what are the standards that are going to be used to compare Entergy and other providers?
What we would do is, first of all, as I told you, they already have on file for us what they were supposed to do. Then we will simply go back behind them and say, okay, this is what you said you were going to do. Did you do it? And kind of just work through those things. And we will then take a look at if there's any more improvements, or if they failed in any of those areas, then what we should do to make sure that doesn't happen again. And that's basically what we do. That happens almost every time. On top of that, besides taking that part as the actual mechanics of it, then we have to drill down to what it cost them, how much money you spend, and all that sort of stuff. So both of those together, it took us about 2.5 years, I think, Renae, on 2.5 years for us to drill down and find out, did you have enough people? Did you have enough ice? Did you have enough? What did you spend this on? What you spend on? I mean, from very small tickets to very large things. So that will take us a while to do it, and then we'll handle it from there. But every time we have a storm, we end up finding more things that we can do, maybe small things, maybe large things. And one thing was securitization, which how to pay for it, which came out of Katrina and Rita. So this will take place right away. We will have our after storm meetings, and then we will begin discussing with all the utilities, not just Entergy, but all the utilities in the state. Now, every parish was affected by these two storms. We had 1.5 million people out of electricity, out of a possible regulated, that's the ones that we regulate, out of a 1.9 million. So we had a lot of people out of electricity, but a lot of people came back up fast because of the transmission. But we still had pockets. Like today, we still only have about 1% of the people still out, but they are down in Lafourche and Cameron and Terrebonne that's underwater, and we're trying to get them dried out enough to bring them back up. So that investigation will take place immediately, and we'll begin going through each and every part of storm recovery.
April, I think you were concerned a little bit earlier about what it would cost later on and how your bills might change.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, my bill is $500 now, so later.
There's a couple of ways that we do. Of course, once Entergy gets all their bills put together, and CLECO puts all their bills, and all the co-ops, and they will start filing with the Public Service Commission the actual cost. Then we have experts that go through these bills look at those bills and determine what is appropriately paid and what's not, and so on down the line. There's a few things go in and out, and then once we determine that number, we take that number. Now, by law, under the regulatory process, the regulated company have a right to get that money back. So we have to make sure that that number is the correct number. Number one, that what we paying for as ratepayers in Louisiana is the right number. Once we get that, the second step is to get it paid for the cheapest possible way we can. If we would leave it just to the companies, then they, by law, will average somewhere between 10, 10.2, 10.5 return. We have now come up with a new tool that we're using at the Public Service Commission called securitization. So what we do is we take those dollars, we look at them, we certify that that's the dollar that you have to pay. Then we go up with the companies to Wall Street, we back it, and they actually put bonds down. And that, instead of paying 10 or 11% return, you only pay, we were lucky enough to get them in at about 4 on one company and about 5 1/4, 5 1/2 on another. So we saved hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars by using securitization versus the regular pay-as-you-go over the next 30 years. We do this in 10 years, and we put it to bed as fast as possible. In this particular case, we just went through securitization for Katrina and Rita and just put the bonds to bed 3 weeks ago, I think. And we just put in the bank the storm reserve, which is going to help you on this one, because now we're going to be able to take that out that you already kind of paid for. So we're going to save a lot of money there because we had that storm reserve. Each utility company is required by the Public Service Commission to have a storm reserve. They start putting a little bit of money away each month out of their money that they come in, their revenues, and we save that, and and then the customers get the interest on it. So in other words, if they got, $100,000 in the bank, any interest they make on it goes back to the storm reserve. They don't get to keep the interest. That's right, I mean that. Yeah. So that storm reserve, to make sure that we were ready for the next storm, and thank God we did, we had that in this last securitization. So we off to a good start. We have $250 million of it pretty much covered between them and CLECO. We ready to go and hit the ground running, because it takes, a lot of money to do this. When you have over 20,000 people on the ground, other than your regular people, and feeding them and watering them and getting them the tools and the equipment. Like right now in Houston, they don't have enough insulators. They don't have enough wires, so they having to go through a lot of stuff because of all the storms that we already have. So to be prepared for this, we have to have the money prepared. So I can tell you that we will guarantee you that it will be the cheapest amount you could possibly see on that bill.
Blanc? I've got a question concerning the economic impact of restoring the power lines on the citizens of this area. Is the impact on the citizens 100% for restoring the power lines, or does the company have some sort of insurance coverage that helps along with that, or is it totally on the citizens to pay for the restoration?
That's a good question. Back when Andrew came through in the early 90s, there was insurance that you could get on your transmission and distribution lines, but because there was such a massive destruction from that storm, the insurance companies no longer offer it at a reasonable price. So basically you can get insurance on your generating units, on some of your substations, and your facilities, your buildings, but the transmission and distribution lines, you cannot obtain insurance. So that's why we have the reserve type structure, where you start to put a little away to create a reserve, because you're basically self-insured for these types of casualties that happen. And as a investor-owned utility, federal dollars are not available for these types of restorations, though they are for the co-ops. They are able to receive FEMA dollars, but investor-owned utilities do not.
And it's like DEMCO, and that group is the co-ops. They get reimbursed by the federal government for their not fully, but they get fairly good amount of the money back.
You mentioned this is an investor-owned utility. In these kind of situations, do the investors suffer any losses, or are all the losses passed on to the customers, the ratepayers?
Well, the way that your regulatory compact works is you have to go out to investors to get them to loan you money. And so with that, there is some assurance that they're going to be able to get their dollars back plus a return. And the commission oversees basically everything we do is open kimono to the commission. And we're able to earn a regulated rate of return, as Tubby said, roughly about 10.5%. So so from that standpoint, the thing that you want as consumers is that we maintain our financial integrity and our creditworthiness, so that we go back to the markets, we're able to get dollars loaned to us at a good rate. So to the extent that our credit were to be eroded because our investors had more risk than they saw when they loaned us money, it would cost us more money to go back to the market again. So from that standpoint, we want our investors to feel that it's a secure investment and that they're able to get their dollars back. And that's the regulatory compact that you have. In these types of storms, nobody asks me, Renae, how much is it going to cost to get the power on? It's how quickly can you get it on, and that's how we respond, with the assurance that if I've spent the dollars prudently and we've performed to the best of our abilities, then we're able to get those dollars back.
Did the governor's press conferences motivate you anymore?
Well, I just have to say that we presented our plan and we executed on our plan. We had 85% of all the customers that we had out were back in within 8 days. And if you look in the greater New Orleans area, we had basically everybody back on within 6 days. In the Baton Rouge area, which was the hardest hit, and as everybody knows from here, we had about 80% back on in 8 days. So I think that we did an excellent job from my assessment, and I think that a lot of people would agree with me on that.
So you've got some fans here, eh?
But I want to switch the topic a little bit with the food stamp issue, okay, with the emergency food stamps. I want to know, how did whoever that was working the food stamps put double amount of food stamps on, all of these people stamp cards, and now they taking them back and want to make them pay? Whose mistake is that?
Well, that particular program, April, falls under the responsibility of our Department of Social Services. And from what I understand, it was a computer glitch that caused that problem. They caught it. They're taking the corrective actions. I will tell you that Interim Secretary Christy Nichols has come in. She's rallied the troops. They meet in our office every morning at 8 o'clock. They're talking to the parishes and putting in, like I mentioned before, those fixes to get this program straight. So, again, it was a computer glitch, and they're fixing it. Information is going out to the public on exactly how that's going to work, and I think that very shortly here you'll see the results of the work that these folks are doing in the Department of Social Services.
I think some of that is also a matter of, Pat was saying earlier, when you have a storm of this magnitude, there's going to be mistakes and little things go wrong. And I think the other element is trying to get there quickly, do something fast. Ups the possibility of a mistake, and I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but I assume it's something of that nature that happened. People trying to really fast to get something done quickly, and there's going to be a foul up sometimes, and it's going to be.
You know how it was with FEMA when FEMA came out, and everybody got this money illegally, and then people started going to jail, and so these poor people here that got these extra food stamps, and they can spend them. So,
and Susan.
Well, I have this question. We talked earlier about our own responsibilities. It's incredible to hear how we're learning as a state, and other states are taking notice of how we are being very smart in all our preparations. I've always benefited when I've gotten my utility bill to see where you're making suggestions of how I can be saving and not even using as much. If churches and other groups are going to be assisting the elderly with big expenses, what could we be doing that really is going to help folks with limited incomes to make their homes more weather resistant? I know the Habitat for Humanity groups, for instance, put more insulation in those houses than what Habitat International has sometimes suggested, because it saves people money here. Anyway.
I think those are really good points. When you look at this, kind of, you step back and you think, okay, kind of what's the whole big picture of the effect of a storm like this? Whether it's, you know, your utility bill goes up because you have restoration costs, or whether the insurance goes up, or, you know, what are all the things that we can look at, not only to deal with the financial effects of that, but in prevention of future storms. I heard you talking a lot about trimming trees and allowing Entergy to trim trees. We have a very aggressive program that we go through every year, and we were actually 96% through it. You know, this year we were not even finished with the year, but you know, a lot of times people don't want us to trim their trees. They have a little different view on it now. But again, you know, trimming the trees, if you have a 100-foot tree falling 50 feet away into your lines, trimming trees aren't going to prevent that. So some of the suggestions about just maintaining the trees in your yard. But I also think paying a lot of attention on how you use electricity and things around improving the quality of the insulation in your home, and the caulking around your windows and your doors, and things that you can do with your water heater and light bulbs. All those things I think are going to continue to have a lot more attention on it going forward.
The Public Service Commission is in the process of we have a docket open on integrated resource plan. That's both on demand side and so that we will move away from the use of natural gas to do generation, and or at least get a better blend, which is going to help. And then also on the demand side, we're going to look at things. We have the new green tariffs in place, and we're going to start moving toward more of the renewable type energy to give us a better blend of our generation in the state, so that we can get away from being so tied to natural gases because of the spikes in natural gas. So along with the utility companies, they have filed with us their integrated resource plans and how we're going to handle them and what we're going to do both on the generating side and on the demand side. So those things are going on right now at the Public Service Commission to try to make sure that we will get to that point to where we can lower the rates of ratepayers. One is in CLECO's area. CLECO was 70% natural gas, 30% coal. With this one unit, they're going to reverse that. And that rate, even though the cost is $1 billion to build the plant, the savings in fuel is going to overcome that. So Entergy's in the same situation with the Little Gypsy plant. So as we begin to move away from that, there's going to be a better blend, and we're not going to be locked into just one fuel. So that's the things that are going on to try to do it. And the tree trimming, they file their tree trimming with us at the Public Service Commission. They have a regular routine that they have to do, and they have to follow certain rules. But we sure like to have a better haircut.
I heard one eternal optimist in our neighborhood, and I'm in a very tree-filled neighborhood, say, well, okay, took that tree out, now I've got southern exposure and I can put panels on my roof. Okay, that's one way to look at it. Or grow tomatoes on your deck.
You know, have too much solar with the trees we have in Baton Rouge.
That's right.
We had a study not too long ago. I think, Renae, you were talking about.
EPA did a study in 1995 of the 58 cities across the United States in terms of the amount of trees, and Baton Rouge is #1 in that study, with 55% of forestry in our area. So it's beautiful. That's why we love it. But it probably gave us some indication as to why we had so much damage.
Do these storms affect business coming in? I mean, does it affect the way people think about Louisiana? I think we're all happy with the response, but what do other people outside of Louisiana think?
I don't think it hurts. Baton Rouge, it's a storm. We had a little problem. We're up running again, and we'll keep going. That's not going to hurt Baton Rouge. My own concern is that I think because you had to evacuate New Orleans, that area, I think it only reinforces the idea about New Orleans. Okay, how should I want to be there or not? And it's already going through that process right now. So I think even though in this storm New Orleans didn't really get damaged at all, it had the power out for I think Renae
Less
said
than a
4
week.
days, 6 days, something like that. But in terms of real damage, there's no damage. Baton Rouge got the damage. And again, Lafourche and Terrebonne had the water damage, but we got the wind damage, and we are the. But no, from our economy, no. Businesses are going to come here just like we had before. Every little place in the country has a storm. You have tornadoes, you have earthquakes, you have floods up in Iowa. Every place has some adverse possibility. So no, it's not going to hurt us. New Orleans is a little bit different because it's right there, very, very, very fragile environment, and already a lot of hesitation. It only amplifies that hesitation. We're going to work twice as hard to get it to come back.
And I think you may actually have the last word tonight. I think we've run out of time, but I appreciate the comments from all of our panelists, and so I want to thank them, Mr. Santos, Ms. Conley, Mr. St. Blanc, and Dr. Richardson. When we come back, we'll have a few closing comments.
Well, Craig, we obviously taped the show after nearly everyone had their power back on.
I think so. I think if we taped this 2 weeks ago, maybe we'd have a different response, but people were happy. People really appreciated the efforts of the state and energy companies to come in and get
Well, they're obviously grateful.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Everything pales if you don't have any electricity.
Right. It was a long little stretch for it.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We invite you to take our full online survey about Hurricane Gustav's aftermath and recovery by going to lpb.org and visiting the Louisiana Public Square link. While you're there, please click on the blog button and talk to us, like Rachel did following last month's program, Coastal Comeback, Louisiana and Mississippi after Katrina. Rachel wrote, "Very good program. Will you be presenting a similar program focusing on Hurricane Rita recovery, the other Louisiana disaster?" Well, Rachel, we understand how you may feel that Hurricane Rita has been overlooked, just as it seems the national media has forgotten Gustav. But we won't forget these storms, and we will continue to monitor all storms that impact our state with shows like the one tonight, as well as Louisiana, the state we're in.
Well, join us next month as we explore November's presidential contest and what the outcome could mean for our state on Louisiana Stake, Presidential Election 08. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org. Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come.